All right, hello everyone, and thank you for watching this video lecture as we wrap up our discussion on the causes of economic growth. Uh, this will be fairly short, which should be nice, and then we'll be available in case anybody needs help studying for next week's exam. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So we left off talking about the importance of honest government. Related to that is this idea of political stability. Civil war, military dictatorships, anarchy tend to destroy institutions necessary for economic growth. Of course, when government is constantly in flux due to these issues, um, it makes it very difficult for proper rules, proper regulations to get passed, to be enforced, things like that. Property rights are very hard to defend. Often in politically unstable countries, the property rights tend to be very much in flux. One regime may seize property rights and appropriate them. Others may try to undo that and seize other property. It tends to be a problem. Furthermore, just the collateral damage from civil war, from anarchy, can just physically destroy institutions, can destroy buildings, can destroy factories, um, destroy courthouses, things like that. Very hard to get any sort of substantial growth when there is so much violence around you. One such example is in the African country of Liberia. Before their last election, or before an election in 2006, where there was a peaceful transfer of power, for 35 years, the government used assassinations and used violence to maintain power. Liberia remains one of the poorest countries in the world. They're starting to turn around now that they have some political stability, but there was very little economic growth, really no economic growth in those 35 years where there was so much violence being used. Again, related to this idea of political stability and honest government is a dependable legal system. A good legal system facilitates contracts, protects private parties from expropriating and stealing from one another, protects property rights, protects the right of contract, the ability, and it creates the incentives to grow, since people feel protected that what they produce will remain theirs until they decide to sell it or whatever it is they try to do with it. Poorly protected property rights can come from either too much or too little government. Too much government, situations like the Soviet Union, Communist China, where governments just appropriated. They had the power. Everything was just concentrated in a central area. And they just appropriated goods and services. Alternatively, too little government, like in Civil War ravaged countries, property rights will not be well affected. It can be very difficult getting that level of government just right. And indeed, some legal systems are so poor that no one really knows for certain who owns what. Or similarly, they can be so complex that nobody really knows who owns what. And in a similar way, it's difficult to borrow money, it's difficult to invest. People aren't sure when they're going to get their money back, what returns they're going to get. A dependable legal system is key. It is extremely important to fostering any sort of economic growth. Somebody who doesn't appropriate property left and right, or even inappropriately appropriate property for, say, like, oh, this group is bad, we're going to take their property, we're going to distribute it, tends to backfire. Competitive and open markets also promote economic growth. We see about half the differences in per capita income are explained by physical and human capital. The other half are explained by the failure to use this capital efficiently. So the level matters, how you use it matters. Competitive and open markets help encourage efficient organization of resources. Think back to macroeconomics, where we argued that free markets, through that profit incentive, get people to figure out new ways to innovate, use their capital to reduce their costs, increasing their profit. And so some of reasons for inefficient organization include unnecessary regulations. Similar to corruption and bribery, if you have to spend a lot of time and resources jumping through unnecessary hoops, it leads to waste. By some estimates, Americans spend about $2 trillion a year just complying with regulations. That's $2 trillion that cannot be used for other resources. And so red tape, which is the time and cost of doing tasks such as starting a business or enforcing a contract, again, divert resources. If you're paying lots of money to a lawyer to try and do all these things, that's money that can't be used for other purposes, other more productive purposes. And barriers to free trade. If folks can't tap into international markets, either as a buyer or a seller, it leads to inefficient use, waste of resources. In particular, it leads to higher costs because individuals cannot take advantage of economies of scale. So as a reminder, economies of scale are the reduction in average costs that can occur as quantity increases. In many cases, if you produce more and more, all else held equal, your average costs will fall, at least until a certain point. Without competitive markets, without international trade, it becomes much more difficult to take advantage of economies of scale. Costs tend to be higher, which necessarily means many opportunities are foregone. And so natural resources help explain ultimate causes of wealth. Many wealthy countries also have lots of natural resources. Physical and human capital is used to help exploit those. Although not every wealthy area has lots of resources. Hong Kong, for example, until fairly recently, was one of the wealthiest areas in the world, despite having virtually zero natural resources. Same with Japan. Japan, being an island nation, has relatively little natural resources, relatively few natural resources, but remain extremely wealthy because they can trade. As we have seen, transport get cheaper, in particular, water over land. It is a lot cheaper to move things over the ocean than it is over land. Countries with access to water tend to be more open to trade and tend to grow. When seaborne trade is restricted, those areas tend to be poorer. And indeed, landlocked countries tend to have lower GDP per capita than countries with access to a coast. History, ideas, geography, and culture and luck all also seem to play a role here. Although, as I was saying earlier, there is a lot of debate about how much of a role that these elements play. So the big takeaway here is that economic growth has raised billions of people out of poverty, helps eradicate diseases and common problems. We have seen historically poor countries can catch up to rich countries very, very quickly, as we saw with South Korea, as we saw with Japan, although there is no guarantee of this. And countries with high GDP tend to have lots of factors of production. More importantly, these institutions encourage the factors of production not only to get developed, but used in an efficient manner, reducing costs and helping foster well-being. We tend to see that the institutions that seem to be correlated and contribute to economic growth are things like private property rights, honest government, political stability. a dependent legal system, and a competitive and open markets. So next week we have our exam. Then we will start getting into some of the more nitty-gritty, how we model economic growth, and different ideas, different factors that contribute some more. So until then, have a great week, and I will see you on the other side of Mardi Gras.